technically one of the things with that latest episode, it started and it was really aggressive on the ears and you could barely hear the person that was talking. So I was like, oh, that's not a good start. I'd be really careful reaching outside of your niche, never mind when you've just started, because for a new listener who's just tuned in for all the reasons that you've given, they've seen your artwork, they've seen your episode title, they're like, yes, I'm interested in this. And then suddenly it's completely outside of the niche. I just think it would be really, really off-putting. For me, it's just non-negotiable. It's just horrible to hear it.
That's awesome advice. Thank you.
Welcome to another episode of Smarter Podcasting with me, your host, Neil Mackay, the podcast guy. We are back with another audit episode. I've been making podcasts since 2019. I started my first podcast as a hobby. That has now grown into a top 5% podcast worldwide. We are attracting sponsors and it just keeps growing and growing even after nearly 7 years coming up. During that time, I pivoted after I lost my job during COVID and started 7 Million Bikes podcast, where we now help people around the world make the best podcast possible. I then started this show, Smarter Podcasting, where I give you tips and tricks, advice, talk to industry experts to help you learn as much as you can and make the best podcast possible. I am really passionate about podcasts. When I see a bad one, it makes me cringe. And when I see a good one, it makes me happy. And I want to help people make the best podcasts. So what I regularly do is do podcast audits where I offer up people who have a podcast already and I will listen to the latest episode and give them feedback on the technical aspects and some of the visual marketing aspects as well. Not so much the content because I'm not an expert in all these different fields and we've done everything from tourism to tech to all sorts of things. So I can't obviously know a lot about that. Now, in this episode today, I am genuinely really, really excited for a couple of reasons. One of the biggest buzzes that you can get as a podcaster is when somebody tells you that they listen to your show. Now, as I mentioned, I have a top 5% podcast, and I know how many people listen to that podcast. It's in the hundreds of thousands now, and I'm still genuinely blown away when anyone tells me. I'm surprised when someone says they listen to my show. So that show's called Discover Vietnam. This show, Smarter Podcasting, much smaller, much more niche. But this guest here, when he contacted me about an audit, he said, I've listened to all of your episodes. And again, I was genuinely blown away, but also terrified because I'm like, what did I say? I genuinely have that kind of imposter syndrome that where I'm like, I don't really know if I'm giving good advice. I think I am. And generally, when I give some sort of advice, I'm happy to say that I then find that I'm backed up either by an expert or a stat. And I'm like, okay, I think I do know what I'm talking about. But it was genuinely scary for somebody to say that they listen to all my podcasts and they've created their own podcast partially based on all of that knowledge. And then they want an audit. So my guest today is the host of a brand new podcast called So You're a Philosopher. My guest today is Christopher Welsh, all the way in Texas. Christopher, welcome to Smarter Podcasting.
Thank you, Neil. I'm super excited. As you may recall, I reached out to you for an audit before I even launched. And you were like, all right, hold on a second. Go ahead and launch first and then let me know and I'll be glad to do it. So that was the advice I took.
I do remember that. So tell me, what are some of the biggest takeaways you've taken from Smarter Podcasting?
Oh, well, the importance of audio, which a lot of what's cool about Smarter Podcasting and your particular approach is that you're so straightforward and honest about your journey and how you're learning, and you're genuinely appreciative when you have a guest on and you learn something new or it corroborates something that you already suspected. And I'm similar in that way. Like I knew that audio was going to be the most important part, and knowing that that's your focus too, I was super excited and eager to get an audit because I wanted to rise to the challenge to create the best audio I could. And starting from scratch and with just a few dollars, I knew it would be a challenge. So there was that. And then I've just really been a sponge, just taking in everything, including the things that I know I'm not quite ready for, but you always want to learn a little bit about in advance, like some of the more, the bigger marketing concepts or you had a guest on that was talking about ways to monetize things by drilling down and to find out who your audience is. And I know I'm not quite ready for that stuff yet. I'm working on the craft first, but it's good to have that in the back of my mind and also to know that that resource is there that I can go back to when I'm ready for it.
Like I've said, you've heard me talk about it. You just aim to be 1% better every episode. And so my first episodes were awful. I must have done about 500 episodes now in total. And they can still be better. And I still sometimes hear things and I'm like, oh, that wasn't great. So, I mean, the fact that you're just starting from a really high, not to get into the audit too soon, but you're starting from a really high level. And I'll tell you about that in a second. And I forgot to mention as well, you have maybe one of the best voices for podcasting.
Wow.
I have to mention. As soon as I pressed play, I was like, wow, this is like warm and cozy and a really great. But a lot of Americans are just so good at talking. I've lived in America. My wife is American. You guys just have a special knack for talking that not everyone in the world has, but yours is especially a great voice for radio. Not a face for radio. I'm not insulting you. A voice for radio.
Thank you. Thank you on both counts. Yeah.
So let's get started. So I start every audit episode with the same question. So what equipment do you record with?
All right. Well, I have the dreaded Blue Yeti microphone.
Oh,
yeah, I know.
The condenser.
Yep, it's a condenser. Yeah. And just like you talk about on the podcast, when I first got this, my first foray into this arena was more I wanted to do audiobook recordings and stuff. So I did some research about that and I got the Blue Yeti. And to help with the Blue Yeti, I built this cardboard box and rug contraption that the Blue Yeti sits in, right? So that I have my own portable little sound studio. And then I record in my closet on top of that I'm right by the highway. So we get like highway noise and stuff. So I'm trying my best to create my own little studio. So I use that.
Nice.
And I record I have I forget what year it is, but it's an M1 MacBook. And I use Audacity for my DAW, my digital audio workstation.
Yeah.
And these headphones, which they're Bose noise canceling headphones. So I think that's the extent of my equipment.
So what is your podcast niche?
So philosophy, but I'm still figuring that out actually, because one of the people I interviewed for one of my podcasts, when I sent it to her, she made a comment that stuck with me. And she said, I love your philosophical nuttiness. And so maybe philosophical nuttiness is my niche. Like, I want to have fun with it. I want to make it really approachable to people. And I just want to have fun doing it as well. So yeah, it's philosophy, but it's not academic philosophy. Not necessarily. That plays a role, but it's philosophy for the people.
All right. And then I need to double check my stats on this because I wrote this question a long time ago, but what makes your podcast different than the other 250,000 podcasts that are published every week?
First of all, because I'm doing it. So I'm going to bring myself to the microphone every time. And not just the microphone, but in the mixing and the production as well. I like to play and have fun with characters and sound effects and that sort of thing. There's that. I think because I'm so excited and passionate about it, I'm going to be bringing a lot of creativity to it as time goes on, and it's going to keep evolving. And then I'm a writer and I love to write stories, and I am so in love with the mythos of philosophers and the stories of Plato and Heraclitus and all of that I want to share that love and the feeling I get when I learn about Pythagoras. And so I started to write little stories to introduce them. And so I think that's, as I learned from you, that's not a new concept in podcasting, but it might be new in philosophy podcasts. I haven't come across that yet.
talk a bit more about that in a second, what you just said there, because I'm excited to talk about that. And then what lessons or values do you want the listener to come away with at the end of each episode?
I want everyone who listens, well, I want the listener to listen, which is also, side note, one of the things I learned from your podcast, one of your guests, and you talked about talking to an individual rather than a group. And so I have adopted that approach. And not only do I think that makes for a better podcast listening experience, but it makes it for a better producing experience for me, because I really do feel like I'm zeroing in on one person. So I want the listener.
Really cool.
Yeah. I want the listener to feel welcomed and to feel like they really enjoyed the experience. If they learned something amazing, if they take anything about philosophy and think about it after the podcast, then I feel like that's mission accomplished.
So to follow up on what you were saying there about, I told you there's something that other podcasts do. What I mentioned to you when we first started talking, and I listened just to the beginning of your podcast, was what you did with that storytelling, which is something that the Noiser Network does. And I'm obsessed with everything the Noiser Network does. They're my favorite one. So they do Real Dictators. They just did the Titanic podcast, The Ship of Dreams, which I've never listened to a podcast twice like that, like a investigative kind of storytelling podcast. Normally I listen to a podcast once and then I go on to something else. This one was so good, so amazing. And I even watched a couple of YouTube videos about how they made it and the music that they put into it. So all of the Noiser podcasts all follow the exact same structure. They start with a story. And when I listened to yours, I was like, wow, this is the exact same. And I appreciate the time and the effort and the skill that goes into that, because I want to do that with my podcast, a Vietnam podcast, Discover Vietnam. I want to make a whole new series, and I would love to do that, but I just don't have the time, because I know how much time and effort it takes to do that. So as soon as I press play on your podcast, and I was like, this is a story, this is amazing. That is what really gets the listener interested, is stories before you even get into it. So that was really amazing. And when I asked you, are you replicating the Noiser Network? Because there's no shame in that. I want to do it. You were like, oh no, I've never heard of them. And I was like, well, they're one of the biggest podcast producers in the world, and they do the exact same thing. So that was really cool. Right, so let's get into it. So just first, at a glance, kind of looking, I was looking at the name. You know, again, I feel like you're going to know everything I'm going to say, but you want the name to say exactly what the podcast is about. And I wasn't really sure what yours was about from the name. So you're a philosopher. I know it's about philosophy, but I was like, what is that about philosophy? So you're a philosopher. Okay, so then I went to check the about section to see if it could give me more information. And it just kind of repeated the title. And I did think your about section was pretty vague. It said a few kind of buzzwords. It said it tells stories, engage with experts, explore everything. And that word everything to me is like the dreaded word. It's going to be about everything and anything. That's just so broad. It's going to explore everything through the lens of wonder, which again, I didn't. So just those things, I didn't really know what any of that meant. Tell stories, engage with experts, explore everything through the lens of wonder. What does that mean? So is it about philosophy? How is it about philosophy? It didn't say in the about section who's presenting it. What is it about? And as I mentioned, what's the listener going to get from this podcast? So just at that first glance, when you look at the name and the artwork and the about section, I was like, I don't really know what this is about. And it didn't define the niche. So you think it's about philosophy, or is it about storytelling? And when I kind of asked you that question, is what is your niche? You didn't really know yet. So that would be something I think you've got such opportunity here to choose a really specific niche. And I don't think there's a big leap. There's nothing really big you need to change. I just think you need to know what it is. Make sure the title and the about section fit that niche. So as soon as somebody looks at your podcast, when they're scrolling the app, they know exactly what it's about and they can really connect with that. So that would be my first thing. Then looking at the cadence, that's something that you could put in the about section as well. We're going to be bringing you weekly episodes, or as you Americans like to say, bi-weekly. I would say fortnightly. I was just having this conversation with a couple of Americans last night. Coming bi-weekly, fortnightly, monthly. Put down the cadence in the about section so then people have that expectation. And it is obviously very brand new, so the cadence isn't very clear yet, but there was 2 episodes posted on the same day, which was the first episodes, which I get. I would have split them up to give people more time to listen, but there's different schools of thought on that. And then your latest episode just came out, which I think was 2 weeks later. So I assume you're going on a 2-week, every 2 weeks?
Correct.
Then with the length, it was good to see each episode, all 3 episodes were about 20 minutes. So I would just make sure to stick to that length because you want to have the consistency of that. So that was just my first at a glance feedback. Any thoughts on that?
Really fantastic feedback, because a lot of this creation takes place in a vacuum. So some feedback is subjective, other is valued because it comes from experience. And so getting to talk to you, who has reviewed so many and you're obsessed with podcasts, it's great to get the expert advice. And especially for someone like me, who I get so wrapped up in the creative part of things that sometimes you forget one of the best writing pieces of advice, which is to kill your darlings. So I can't be too precious about how clever I think the about section might be if it doesn't work. So the feedback is perfect. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. And it's so interesting you're saying about in a vacuum, because I'm the same. I mean, I do most of my stuff in a vacuum too. And I've said this to people before. The advice I'm giving you, it's kind of like, do what I say, not what I do, because you could probably look at my podcast. I've never even evaluated my own podcast, and I probably should. And I would probably find loads of things that are not right as well, you know what I mean? So it's always different when you're looking at something from the outside. So yeah, I think that helped. So then jumping into the branding and the visual kind of consistency. So the artwork, I was impressed because it was really easy to read, and you'll have heard me talk about it. Sometimes the font is so thin, or the colors don't match, or it doesn't stand out. So sometimes it can be really difficult, but it all stood out. So that was really good. There was no, as you know as well, there was no generic podcast imagery. There wasn't like a microphone and a set of headphones, which has no relevance to yours. So it was easy to read, and that was really good. But maybe this is something I don't know about philosophy. So I was excited to ask you this question. Why is there an octopus on the cover?
I wish I had my canned response ready. You see, I'm wearing an octopus t-shirt. So
right,
I was talking with a friend about this, and he was like, you should come up with an answer. There's 8 limbs. There's 8 sides to philosophy, and it's all ran by the brain. The truth is, I love octopus. So I had my daughter draw that for me. I just had this cool idea of a thinking octopus. So I was like, draw me an octopus with the thinker. And that's what she came up with. Hence the name Ponderpus, which is the website where you go to find all these, where the podcast is. So that's one side of it. But also, one of the reasons I'm so fascinated by octopuses is they really are like the closest thing we have on Earth to an alien intelligence with a different branch of consciousness. Each of their limbs, possibly, they're still researching all this, but it seems like each of their limbs do have like a proto-consciousness or a different mind at work, but they all work in coordination with the brain. So I could eventually come up with some, like, retcon a really cool philosophical reason why. But again, this is one of my darlings that I was just like, this is cool. I'm going to run with it and see if people jive.
It's amazing. So that's why I wasn't like, don't have an octopus. I was like, I want to know, there must be something between, there must be a reason why there is an octopus. I think that's an episode right away, and I think you should do one soon because I think if you make that part of your branding and you build on it and you keep going and you explain to people, like what you just explained to me was super interesting. I'm a scuba diver. I've seen octopuses. It's the coolest thing in the world when you see an octopus in the wild. So yeah, I would definitely do an episode about that because I think that's super interesting, and then I would keep it. That's why I was like, I want to know more about it. So that's cool. The other thing about the episode artwork is you want to keep it consistent. So I know you've only done 3 episodes, but the artwork is inconsistent. So the first 2, there's no artwork. And the reason I knew that is because if you go on Apple Podcasts, nothing shows up. for the artwork for the episode. But if you go on Spotify, it defaults to the main artwork. So it's different on the different platforms. And then I noticed that the third has its own artwork. So if you go on an Apple podcast, you'll see nothing, then an artwork. And then on that third one as well, I see that you've taken the main one and you've put it on a billboard sign, which was really cool. But again, on a phone, the signage, it was so small. It was too small to read. And it just looks inconsistent. So I would do a different artwork for every episode. It is more work, but it does help them stand out on the platforms. It makes them look really individual. If you chop and change, it looks really bad. Because if you start scrolling down and some of them don't have it, some of them do, it just looks unprofessional, I think. And it looks good when you have different ones for every episode. But I would do either never do new artwork or always do new artwork. Don't do some where you don't do it and some where you do.
That's awesome advice. Thank you. That's because I didn't realize that I just assumed that the show artwork was going to show up for every episode. And then I just did a different one for the third one because it was just a picture of me at the event. But I like the idea of doing a different one for each one. So thank you.
You're welcome. I mean, and it's only recently I've actually transitioned from, I used to, up until a few months ago, listen to podcasts on Spotify. And then I changed to Apple Podcasts, and I've now started looking at both. I used to only look at Spotify, and then I started looking at Apple Podcasts, and I was like, oh, they're different. So I only just found this out like super recently. But then, so going into like the metadata, the episode titles, of course, I love that you didn't have unnecessary numbers. The titles were good, short, easy to read. But the thing I did notice was they weren't very catchy, and they didn't tell you what the episode was about. So I think you could do more to grab the listener. And I can't remember the character length. I think it's up to 70 characters. You could have made them a little bit longer just to help get that attention. Because what you've just got to remember is somebody's going to find your show. So that's partly why the artwork and the title of the show and the about section are so important, because that's the first thing they're going to see. Then they're going to be on their phone. They're going to scroll down. I used to think that they're just going to listen to the latest episode, but well, I know I don't. And from the people I've spoken to, they don't. They're going to scroll down and find the one that relates most to them. So you need to think as they're scrolling down, it needs to be a title that's going to make them stop and go, oh, I want to listen to this one. And then you get into that's why the audio is so important after that. So I was looking at episode titles, the show notes. I thought were good because you didn't have that generic in this episode. So they clearly weren't written by AI, which is a big red flag. I didn't see any obvious like AI patterns or anything like that. But you have the first sentence is text the show, which I use Buzzsprout as well. I know it's a great feature from Buzzsprout, but I have it on my show notes, but it's way down at the bottom. And as you probably know, most people don't really go to the show notes. And so in all my time, I've used that text the show feature. I think I've had one person use it, and it was what was it they said? They disagreed with me on something, and it was quite funny. Oh, I can't remember now, but it was, they only used it to tell me I was wrong about something when I wasn't. But this was about my Discover Vietnam podcast. And my guess is that you were doing that because you want people to text you. And that's why you've put it so prominently and you've put it up the front. And I completely get that. I think just for the sake of how it looks, I would move it further down. And you've probably heard me talk about it as well. I think maybe it doesn't fit yours because your show's a different style. It's not an interview show, but we do the quote from the show right at the top of the show notes just so people can kind of grab them a bit. So that's why we do that. But other than that, yeah, really good. The show notes look great. I don't put a lot of onus on them because I don't think people read them that much, but I do think they are important and you should do them. The only thing I thought you could just add some timestamps maybe, which look good, and also they actually mean that people can click on the timestamp and it will jump right to that part of the show. You can create them with AI. You don't need to create them yourself or anything like that. So I would have a look about that. Cool. So after all of that, this is all the stuff I go through before I even press play. And then eventually I press play. So I always do your latest episode. So we're going to talk about that, and we'll talk about, you did something a bit different, and we're going to talk about that as well. But technically, one of the things with that latest episode, it started with a really loud car honking, really loud, and it was really aggressive on the ears. and you could barely hear the person that was talking. So I was like, oh, that's not a good start. So just think about that in the future. Just think about people listening. Then there was a short jingle, so that was good. The intro is technically really good. It's clear that you've learned so much. I was really impressed with that. But there was no relation to what the people were saying to the philosophy. There was no relation to the title of the episode. There was no relation to the title of the show. It just seemed so disconnected. You then introduced yourself, but the music was too loud that I couldn't really hear you properly. And you say in that introduction that you normally do podcasts about this, but you've only done 2 episodes, so and they came out on the same day. So I think it's too early to say you normally do podcasts about this.
Yeah.
And then also episode 3 is too soon to make a departure. As you said, using your words, you said, I'm going to make a departure on this episode. I think maybe after 100 episodes you can. You probably still shouldn't, but it's too soon after just 2 episodes to make a departure. So I think that if it had been made clearer from the title of that 3rd episode and the intro sound bites and then its relation to the theme of the podcast, it may have worked, but it just didn't work because it was just so different. And going ahead a bit, so I skipped through to 6 minutes and there was still no mention of philosophy at all. So I kept going through, and you said, I've got 2 questions that I'm going to ask everyone. So I was like, okay, so these are going to be philosophy related, but I can't remember what they were, but they weren't philosophy related. And I went through to 12 minutes and there was still no mention of philosophy at all. So I gave up on that episode because it didn't relate to your podcast. But there was one thing I did notice, and after seeing your setup with your condenser microphone, this now makes perfect sense. I could hear mouth noises, which for me is just non-negotiable. It's just horrible to hear. I hate hearing the saliva in the mouth, the lips kind of smacking. I listen with noise cancelling headphones on, and most people, not most, but many people do these days, especially with like the new AirPods 3. I got them for my wife and they have like noise cancelling built in. So those small noises, well, you might listen on your laptop or your computer speakers, or you might listen on a Google Home or your speakers, and you probably won't hear them. But if you've got headphones on, you will hear that. So just some tips is drink water, speak slightly off axis, don't speak directly into the microphone. So aim it past your mouth. But I think after what you showed me, it's because you have a condenser microphone, to be honest, because condensers are amazing in a sealed environment. Like you've put it in that box, which does block out a lot of that environment noise, because that's what condensers pick up, everything. But condensers are just way more sensitive than a dynamic microphone. So they will pick up those mouth noises more because they pick up everything. So if you're not ready to change it, that's fine, because you've got that. I'm impressed with that cardboard box. It does reduce a lot of the environment noise. So just make sure maybe a little bit further away, make sure you have some water, don't chew gum or anything like that. Not having lip balm on your lips kind of helps a little bit as well. Avoid licking your lips, things like this. Because even when I record in the studio, I can hear my guests sometimes immediately, like their mouth gets sticky, and I'll be like, do you want some water? So that water is just a really easy way to help that. But yeah, so I went back an episode, which I don't normally do because I normally only listen to the latest one, because that's your newest one, and that's the one that's the most up to date. But I did go back and to give that a chance, to, because the latest episode was so different.
Yeah,
I want to get a better sense of a podcast. So I just said I'd be really careful reaching outside of your niche. Never mind when you've just started, because for a new listener who's just tuned in for all the reasons that you've given, they've seen your artwork, they've seen your episode title, they're like, yes, I'm interested in this. And then suddenly it's completely outside of the niche. I just think it would be really, really off-putting. So let's go back to your episode 2, which I've mentioned already. I love the start of it. I love the story. It's just really, really great. The kind of technical stuff I noticed is there's no long silences, no abrupt cuts or dropped audio. The audio was generally pretty good. No accidental dead air or glitches and things like this. And just so impressed with, as I mentioned right at the beginning, the technical aspects of it, the storytelling, the outline. I mean, I assume it's scripted, which is, and I don't mean that in a bad way at all. It was just really, really well put together. It was really refreshing to see to hear an episode that wasn't an interview podcast like this one we're doing right now, because those are the easiest ones to do. To have one that is thought out and planned, I was just really, really impressed with. But at 409, the volume increased dramatically, like so much so I had to turn my volume down, which you just have to be really careful with, because you have to imagine that someone is driving and then the volume was jumped up. They may not have the ability to turn it down. So you just really need to make sure that your volume is equalized throughout, which I do advocate using Descript because it automatically normalizes the volume when you export it, things like this. Audacity is definitely much more technical and fiddly. You have to make sure everything is exact. So I would be careful with that. And then at 707, the volume and the quality just changed out of nowhere. And then I realized that you're talking to someone on the phone, but there was no kind of like segue, like, hey, so now I'm going to have talked to so-and-so on the phone. The quality and the volume just changed dramatically. And so it was just really clear that your audio had changed. It became kind of echoey and poor. So it was obviously not recorded in the same style. And then your guest, Nathan, his audio was so bad on the phone call, I actually couldn't even hear what he said. And I had no idea why he was on the show. So it kind of came a little bit abruptly. I loved the concept. I loved the technical ambition. And I said, it's great to hear something different. So I would expect you to just keep getting better and better and better, because these are all technical things. You just have to do them and learn from your mistakes, and it just gets better every time. So I wouldn't stress about it, but that was just something I noticed. And I think there was one part where you re-recorded just one sentence, because it didn't introduce anyone. It wasn't a change of topic. It was just one sentence, but it was clearly you'd recorded it in a different setting. It was that kind of echoey, poor audio. Not poor, but not as good as the other one. Just be careful. You probably know the one I'm talking about. Was that a sentence that you re-recorded?
There was a couple of re-recordings that I did, or they were additions. Like I went and I listened to it first, and then I realized I need to say something here for a transition or something. So I went back and I call it my pickups. I go back and I record additional things to add in. But for some reason, I don't know why. Trust me, I banged my head against the wall trying to figure out. I had the same setup. I recorded it using the same mic.
Oh, no.
Why did it sound so different? So,
yeah, so frustrating like that, isn't it? I know exactly what you mean. So, but overall, that was good. And then just looking at the episode structure, it's obviously just quite new, so it's hard to see if you're doing a consistent style each time. You introduced yourself, but I was so disappointed because you've said that you've listened to all the episodes. And the thing I say repeatedly is to introduce yourself and why you are the guide, not just your name. And you missed this. So I thought it was you say, my name's Christopher Welsh, and I'm going to talk to you about philosophy because blah, 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 because I have an interest in it. I don't know your background. I have a degree, a PhD. I just love reading books about philosophy. Anything about why are you the person that the listener should trust to take them through this process about philosophy. So I couldn't believe you missed that.
It's funny. I recorded a pilot episode that I ended up not using. And in that one, I definitely did. Like I talked about that for a minute. And I'm still working on my voice and my style and exactly what I want the finished product to be like. And I just didn't do it enough.
And as I've said, it's just literally one thing. I mean, I said it in this. I've been making a podcast since 2019, blah, blah, blah. It's just literally it's not like a big, reading out your CV. From 1975, I went to my account, all of that. It's just a quick one. But apart from that, it was good. I mean, no like excessive housekeeping up front. There was no over talking. Yesterday, I had a 7-layer dip. I bring that up because I do remember listening to a podcast one time and it's like, oh, what did you have for dinner last night? It's like, I had a 7-layer dip. And I was like, why am I listening to this? So there was none of that kind of stuff up front. It was great. And I actually I wrote down that you were speaking to one listener. There was no you guys. You could tell that you were talking to one person. So that was really impressive to hear. And as I mentioned already, just really well structured. You could tell it was practiced and scripted in just a really good way. You weren't just rambling into the microphone. So that was great. And then for your outro, this is obviously how you leave the listener. And there was no outro structure. And I know I've talked about having an abrupt ending, but it was quite abrupt, I thought. And there was no like, thanks for listening. Oh, there was a little bit thanks for listening, I think. But I just thought there could have been a bit more of a structure to the outro. And there was no real call to action. So you said, let me know what you're looking for. That was just really unclear. What does that mean? And there was no direction of how to let you know. So what did you, we talked about having to text the show, but if you want them to use that, let me know what you want to know about philosophy or blah, blah, blah. It was just a kind of unclear call to action and unclear how they could get in touch with you. So I was just thinking about rewording that sentence. And I really like the ending staying just short, quick little, and you talked about earlier playing with sound effects, things like this. There was the bit of the flicking through the book sound effect that you used really well. I love that as well. I love that you're playing with these technical things. So, I mean, overall, just really great first 2 episodes. I love the ambition. I know the time it takes to make it. That intro story, I'm just so impressed with. Like I told you when you first contacted me and I pressed play right away, it just made me sit up and take notice. So I've continued doing that because that would make me keep listening, because that's what gets people. So keep doing what you're doing for the first 2 episodes. I wouldn't do another episode like number 3 again. Work on your titles, your about section, and avoiding those mouth noises and the changes in the sound, and you'll be great. But overall, yeah, well done. It was awesome.
Thank you, Neil. That's great. And the specifics that you called out are really great to hear, because you get your friends to listen to your podcasts, and you do a couple of people that you may never know who they are that listen to it. And even your friends are just going to go, it's great, or you sound wonderful. But the specific things like the time stamps and the things that I was experimenting with, like having, I have a Google voicemail set up where people can call in and leave a voicemail. And then I used that in the episode. But yeah, I noticed like, I did what I could with the voice, but he was so quiet. And it's good to hear your feedback on, yeah, that was really crap. I couldn't hear what he was saying. And also playing.
I did not say it was really crap.
No, you did. But also the little creative technical bits, like, should I introduce this? Should I just drop it in? Playing with that creative structure and without knowing how it's received by the audience is tough. So getting the very specific feedback is wonderful. And then just eating up all the very, like the craft that you're talking about, everything from the elements of the show notes to the ending and the beginning and I know all about call to action from many different kinds of industry, but figuring out how exactly I want to do it and what I did enough? No, clearly not. So it's a lot to take away and think about. And then, so just the background of that 3rd episode, one of the reasons why it was so different was actually recorded that first. I was still developing my style. I did the pilot, and then I was still trying to figure stuff out. Like, how can I stand out? I love all these philosophy podcasts, but trying to emulate them didn't feel genuine to me. Like, I'm like, I could try and be like that, but it doesn't feel quite right. So what is genuine to me? And in the process, I went to the No Kings and I recorded these interviews just out on a whim. And I was like, I got to put this thing together, at least for the people who I did the interviews with, to show them that I was like legit, not just some weirdo. And so, yeah, in my intro, I'm like, normally I do podcasts about, I hadn't even done a podcast yet, but I was trying to anticipate like where I would go. But yeah, I think, I hear you. I think especially for now, I'll probably take that off the main podcast and maybe just put it on the website. If people are curious, almost like if they discover it on a blog or something, they can go listen to that, but not as part of my consistent theme.
I didn't want to tell you that, but yeah, I would take it off your podcast because I think it just muddies the waters too much.
Yeah. Message received.
Amazing though. Christopher, thank you so much for putting yourself forward for an audit. It's been amazing to talk to you. I'm excited. I've already subscribed to your podcast. I'm going to be looking out for more episodes. I'm going to be listening for those 1% improvements every time. I want to hear more of those stories every time. It's really, really amazing. And thank you for listening. Remember, if you want an audit, get in touch with me, or if you want to work with me and 7 Million Bikes podcast, then go to 7millionbike.com or send me a message on any of the social platforms, anything like that. Don't forget, rate this podcast if you like it. Please subscribe, turn on notifications as well. That will really help. And the best thing that you can do is share this podcast with someone else who wants to make the best podcast possible. Christopher, thank you so much for joining me on Smarter Podcasting.
Thanks, Neil. You rock. Appreciate you.